When I was growing up, it was mostly just me and my mom. At the time, she was raising me on her own, and I was her only child. Since it was just the two of us, there wasn't anyone around to watch me when she went to work, so I had to stay home by myself a lot. This happened when I was 11 years old, and we lived in a small apartment together. One day, like usual, my mom left for her job. She always worked the evening shifts at a diner in the neighboring town. She headed off to work, and I did what I always did to pass the time: watch the same movies I had already seen over and over. A few hours later, while I was watching a movie, I got a call from my mom. I picked up, but she didn't say anything. "Hey? Mom? Hello?" Still nothing. I listened closely, and after a moment, I heard deep breathing. I sat there, feeling confused and a bit creeped out. I ended the call, thinking maybe she had called me by accident. I went back to my movie, trying to shake it off. But then, I got another call from her. More heavy breathing. At this point, I was more freaked out, but convinced myself it was another accidental call. About 20 minutes passed, and I decided to get something to drink. I got up from the couch and headed to the kitchen. When I reached for a glass, I saw my mom's phone lying on the counter. I still can't make sense of what happened that night. Seeing her phone on the counter, my whole body froze. I couldn't move for what felt like 10 seconds. When I finally snapped out of it, I ran around the apartment, turning on every light. Then I sat back down, terrified, pretending to watch the movie. I wasn't really paying attention to it, but acting like everything was fine was the only way I could deal with how scared I was, thinking someone or something might be in the house. I didn't tell my mom about it for a week because I was too afraid to bring it up, worried that something worse might happen. This story doesn't really haunt me or anything now, and honestly, I sometimes look back on that night and laugh at how strange it all was. I was staying at my grandmother's house for the weekend. It was a small old place, tucked at the end of a quiet street. She had lived there for as long as I could remember. The floors creaked whenever you walked, and at night, the wind would shake the windows just enough to make you wonder if someone was outside. I always felt a bit uneasy when I was there alone, but during the day, it didn't seem so bad. It was Saturday evening, and my grandmother had gone to visit a friend. She wouldn't be back until late, so I was on my own. The house felt colder than usual, but I figured that's just how it got when no one was around. I tried to keep busy, flipping through TV channels and checking my phone, trying not to think about how empty the house felt. After a few hours, the sun went down, and the house got darker. The lights flickered now and then, but I didn't think much of it, figuring the wiring was just old. Around 9 p.m., I heard a sound outside. At first, it was just a soft bump, like something small hitting the side of the house. I told myself it was probably just a branch or a stray cat. But then the noise got louder. It wasn't random anymore. It sounded like someone, or something, was walking around outside. I stood up, my heart pounding, and went to the window. I pulled the curtain back just a little and peeked outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the dim glow from the street lamps stretching shadows across the yard. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. But then I heard the back door rattle. It wasn't just a noise. It sounded like someone trying to open the door. I froze. My mind was racing. I hadn't locked it. I hurried through the hallway, my footsteps sounding too loud in the quiet house, toward the kitchen where the back door was. When I got there, I stopped for a second and listened. There was no sound coming from the other side, but I could feel someone was out there. I grabbed the lock and turned it, securing the door. My hands were shaking. I stepped back, trying to catch my breath, but the house was too quiet. It was almost as if it was waiting for something to happen. I went back to the living room, hoping things would calm down. But then, I heard a slow knock on the front door. It wasn't rushed or nervous. It was like whoever was out there knew I was inside and was just waiting for me to answer. I stared at the door, my stomach sinking. No one ever knocked on that door, especially not this late at night. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people just showed up out of nowhere. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. I felt sick. I stood still, not even breathing. Whoever was outside knocked one more time, slower, almost like they were taunting me, waiting for me to make the first move. I backed away from the door, moving toward the hallway, unsure of what to do next. I didn't feel safe anymore. The windows were closed, the doors locked, but I felt trapped. Then the door handle twisted. I could see it moving slightly, like whoever was out there was testing it, seeing if it would open. I held my breath, hoping they would leave, praying they wouldn't get inside. After what felt like forever, the handle stopped moving. The knock didn't come again. I stood in the hallway for what seemed like hours, waiting, listening for any sound. The house was silent again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. After a while, I worked up the courage to go back to the living room. I went to the window and peeked outside, hoping to see if someone was still there. But there was nothing. No one was outside. The yard was empty, and the street looked the same as before. No footprints, no cars, no sign that anyone had been there. I stared out into the night, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had seen. The knocks, the handle turning. It had all happened. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, wrapped up in a blanket, waiting for my grandmother to come home. When she finally did, I didn't tell her what happened. She asked why I was awake, but I just shrugged and pretended it was nothing. The next morning, I went outside to clear my head. That's when I saw them. Muddy footprints leading up to the back door. They were fresh, still wet, and they stopped right at the door where I had locked it the night before. But there was something even worse. The footprints didn't stop at the back door and leave. They circled the house, around and around, over and over again. The same path, worn into the dirt like whoever was out there had been walking for hours, just waiting. That night, I realized they hadn't left. They were still out there, watching, waiting for their next chance. One night, my neighbors asked me to look after their house while they were out of town. I didn't really mind. They lived right next to me, so all I had to do was check in once or twice and keep an eye on things. They gave me their spare key, and I figured I'd just stop by after dark to make sure everything was okay. Around 9 p.m., I thought it was a good time to head over. I grabbed the key and walked to their house. The place was completely dark, just like they left it. I unlocked the door, went inside, and turned on the lights. At first glance, everything looked fine. The living room was exactly how they left it. I walked through the house, checking the windows and doors to make sure they were all locked. As I passed the kitchen, I noticed the back door was unlocked. I could have sworn they said everything was locked up. Maybe I just heard wrong. I went ahead and locked it, then kept moving. I went upstairs to check the bedrooms. That's when I heard a noise from downstairs, like something heavy dragging across the floor. My stomach tightened. I'd just been down there, and it was completely quiet before. I stopped in my tracks, listening hard. The noise came again, but louder this time, still from the living room. It was clear now something was moving down there. My heart started racing. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to run like a coward. Plus, I needed to know what was going on. I slowly made my way back downstairs, trying not to make any noise. The living room was exactly how I'd left it, but something had changed. The back door, the one I had just locked, was wide open. Cold air was blowing in, and the curtains were moving a little. I felt all the muscles in my body tense up. I took a few steps toward the door, trying to see outside, but it was too dark to make out anything. My thoughts were spinning. Had someone been inside before I came in? Were they still here? I quietly shut the door and locked it again. Just as I turned to leave, I heard that noise again, the dragging sound. Only this time it was much closer, like it was right behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see what it was. I walked straight out of the house, locking the front door behind me. As soon as I was outside, I rushed back to my own place, locking my door and turning off all the lights. I sat by the window watching their house, waiting for something else to happen. The rest of the night was quiet. No more sounds, no more open doors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that house. Someone or something had been there, and they weren't supposed to be. The next day, my neighbors came home, and I gave them their key without saying much. They thanked me, and I told them everything was fine. But as I watched them walk up to their front door and unlock it, something didn't sit right with me. I knew what I heard. I knew the back door didn't open itself. That night, when their house was dark again, I heard a noise from next door, a dragging sound, just like the one I'd heard when I was inside. It was Saturday night, and I was home alone. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me to look after the house. I didn't mind. It gave me a chance to chill out and do whatever I wanted. I grabbed some snacks, sat down on the couch, and started watching TV. After about an hour, though, I started feeling bored. The house was really quiet. Too quiet, actually. I could hear small creaks and groans from the walls and floors, like the house settling, but that was normal. Still, something didn't feel right. It was one of those moments when you can't quite say why, but you know something's off. I went to the kitchen to get a drink. As I walked past the window that looked out into the backyard, I stopped. The motion light was on, even though I didn't see anything moving outside. I stared at the yard, expecting maybe a cat or a raccoon, but there was nothing there. After a minute, I shook my head and brushed it off, thinking it was probably just the wind or a branch setting the light off. I went back to the couch and tried to focus on the TV again, but I couldn't get the light out of my mind. It was like a weight in the back of my head that I couldn't shake off. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was almost midnight. I told myself to stop overthinking and just relax, but deep down, that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. About 20 minutes later, the motion light clicked on again. This time, I couldn't ignore it. Slowly, I stood up and made my way back to the kitchen. I looked out the window, and sure enough, the backyard was lit up. But again, I couldn't see anything moving. No animals, no people, just the empty yard, lit up by that harsh white light. I backed away from the window, feeling my chest tighten. Something was wrong. As I turned to go back to the living room, I heard a noise. It was faint, but I knew I heard it. A soft, dragging sound coming from right outside the back door. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to hear it again. There it was, a slow, scraping noise, like something was being dragged across the patio. I felt my stomach drop. My heart started racing, and I knew I had to check what was going on. I moved closer to the back door and peeked through the small window in the door. That's when I saw it. There was someone crouched down by the door. They were so close I could see their hand gripping the door frame, slowly pulling something heavy across the ground. Couldn't breathe, couldn't even move. It wasn't an animal or some random thing. It was a person. They were real, and they were right outside my door. I backed away as quietly as I could, trying not to make any noise. My mind was racing, thinking about whether I had locked the door earlier. I couldn't remember, and I didn't want to risk getting too close again to check. If they heard me, they'd know I was right inside. I moved carefully toward the front door, thinking I could sneak out of the house and get away. But as I reached the front hallway, a terrible thought hit me. I had left the key in the back door earlier when I let the dog out in the afternoon. If they tried the door, they'd get in easily. Panic hit me hard. I grabbed my phone and dialed for help, but I didn't stick around. I slipped out the front door, leaving it open just a crack so I could keep an eye on what was happening. I crouched down behind the bushes in the yard, trying to stay as still as possible, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Time dragged on. I don't know how long I sat there, waiting and watching. Then I saw something move in the backyard again. The figure stood up slowly. They were holding something heavy in their hands, dragging it toward the fence. My skin went cold when I saw what it was. They were holding a shovel, dragging it across the patio, scraping it against the ground. I felt sick. What were they doing with a shovel in my backyard at midnight while I was home alone? The motion light flickered off, plunging the yard into darkness again. I stayed crouched behind the bushes, trying to control my breathing. I didn't hear anything for a while, and I didn't dare move. I just stayed hidden, waiting for them to leave. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, couldn't be sure. Eventually, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. When the police arrived, I felt a small sense of relief, but it didn't last long. They searched the yard and found deep marks in the dirt where the person had been crouching. But by the time they got there, whoever it was had already disappeared. The police told me there had been break-ins in the area recently, but they hadn't caught the person yet. They tried to assure me it was probably just someone looking for an easy target. But they didn't find the shovel. To this day, I still wonder why they were digging in my yard in the middle of the night. What were they planning to do? And worse, what if they come back?